Welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. I'm very excited to introduce our guest to you today. But before I do, I want to thank some people that we always thank. We want to thank brassandwinds.com, a Quinn the Eskimo company. When we're looking for brass or wind instruments here at Willow Music, we always turn to Brass and Winds first. They're fantastic people, great array of instruments, and they'll do the right thing by you. So please check them out. You're watching Truer MU, the truth about music. We have a YouTube channel where we talk to amazing people about music and other subjects, creative and otherwise. And you can also check us out for free courses and things about jazz and things like that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to a gentleman I have known for many years and could not wait to bring him on the show with you. His name is Fletcher Moore. He's a writer, musician, and programmer living in Atlanta, Georgia. You can hear his music on the Front Porch Session Players CD Decades, which incidentally I also happen to be on. And his writing has been published in periodicals like The Bitter Southerner, among others. And most importantly, he produces a regular blog called The Red Clay Bestiary. Fletch Moore, thank you for coming to my show today.
Hey, thank you for having me. This is interesting.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah,
I've already told him we know each other, so that really ought to make it interesting.
right. Yes.
Well, let's
I was
start.
thinking,
Go ahead.
can I ask you, can I start with a question for you?
Oh, wow. Sure. Nobody ever does that.
This is maybe too inside baseball for anyone who doesn't know the two of us, but I was just curious, like I can't remember when or where I met you.
Oh, I can tell you exactly, but that's too inside baseball for the two of us. No, we met the chicken feed project.
I thought it was something to do with that. Yeah.
Yep. That's where we met. And for the audience who doesn't know, I will tell you the whole story. Fletch and I took part in something called the Chicken Feed Project, which was food for kids, how kids can cook and help their parents cook. And it was a CD, and it was a lot of fun. And Fletch was the recording engineer on that project that was done in a living room, and I was the musician brought in to make up music on the spot. So that was where we met many years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about you for a little while anyway, before we get back to me.
Good.
I went looking for information about you because I always like to research my people. And one thing that I found out is that Fletch Moore is actually a common name.
Yeah. Well, I know all of them.
I didn't think Fletcher Moore would really be that common, but there are quite a few.
Yeah, there are a few, and I really truly do know several. Like this is a point of contention in my life, So for a long time there was this company in Alabama called the Fletcher Moore Company, and they owned the domain name FletcherMoore.com, which, as you might have guessed, I covet deeply.
Right. Yeah.
So I kept an eye on it for years, and I step back just a little bit and say that when I was working at the Vanderbilt Music Library in the mid to late, I guess it was the mid to late 90s, and this was about the time that Alta Vista was getting started, and I Googled I Alta Vista'd my name one day, and I found this kid in South Carolina. His name was Fletcher Moore, and I sent him an email, as one does.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, hey, my name is Fletcher Moore too. We should start a club. And he wrote back and he was like, yeah, because he was 13.
Yeah. You might not have wanted to do that.
Probably not. But I've had this weird sort of intertwined life with this guy because, like I say, I kept an eye on FletcherMoore.com for ages. And then I took my eye off the ball briefly, and the company went out of business, and the South Carolina Fletcher Moore registered the domain.
Oh, no.
And then he had the temerity to move to Boston, where I used to live, and become a web developer.
That's great. Well,
yeah.
Remind me to tell you about Adam Cole, the wrestler, who has taken up all my band.
Oh, I know about it.
Yeah. It's not me. And it's not even his real name. Austin Jenkins is his real name, and he changed it to Adam Cole. Thank you so much for
obviously to steal
it from me. Right. Clearly, no other reason. I mean, me being as famous as I am. So you got a bachelor's in music from Middle Tennessee State University, and then a master's in music from the University of Cincinnati in music history. But you make your living as a programmer. How did you get from taking music so seriously to not taking it seriously at all?
I'm not sure I ever really took it all that seriously. I mean, first of all, they let me into undergraduate school as a music student, which was a terrible mistake. I didn't I didn't know how to read music. I didn't really know anything about music other than the music that I liked. And I liked to play. I wasn't terribly good, and I had been kicked out of school. I'd been kicked out of the University of Alabama, Huntsville, where I was studying mathematics.
Oh.
And what I discovered, I was a little young, like you know how there's that sort of cutoff point where you're either, if you're born in like September, you're either going to be a year older than everybody else or a year younger than. Well, I was a year younger, so
Okay.
I was 17 when I started college, and I'd never had cable TV in my life, and my roommate had it. And so I just sat up all night watching movies. I mean, essentially, I didn't study math. I studied films.
Yeah.
I studied HBO. So, if you don't go to class, they give you Fs. So I got kicked out.
Let that be a lesson to you, kiddies.
Yeah. Near 2 quarters.
Okay,
And
so they let you in to Middle Tennessee State University
yeah,
and you got your degree, but then
I
you went and
did.
got you a master's. So I mean, you're not fooling anybody. You cared about music.
Yeah, I'm a pretty good learner, I guess. I pick things
Mhm.
up fairly quickly. So I did learn to read music, and I did learn to play, and learn some theory. Actually, my undergraduate degree, weirdly enough, is in theory and composition.
Mhm.
So ostensibly, I can write music, although I haven't written any since I left there.
Which is maybe not so different from programming. There's some correlation there, maybe.
Programming is very much about like, here's a specific problem, and you're just going to drive to a solution. You want an efficient solution in the end. So
Mhm.
uh, it's not to say that there isn't a creative aspect to it. There certainly is, but um, it's a little. I could think it's a little more cut and dried.
Well, I mean, essentially, the heart of orchestration is the same thing. I mean, there is a lot of art to it, but
Mhm.
that's after you figured out how to make it as efficient and playable as possible.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I wrote music for other instruments besides guitar, but eh, I was not dedicated enough, and I don't think I ever really fully understood what the challenges that other musicians had were. But yeah, I mean, the thing about computer programming, like I did study math at the University of Alabama, and I didn't choose that because it was as far as possible from what I was good at. I mean, that's what I was good at, and I started programming when I was like 10, which was hard in 1980 because I didn't have a computer, and they were not even available in particularly large quantities. But I lived with my grandparents for a while, and my grandmother used to drop me off at Radio Shack,
Ah, wow.
and I would go and program the display unit TRS-80,
Huh.
and there was like a little book there that had an introduction to the basic programming language. And so I just sat there and figured it out, and I was really drawn to it. I was kind of like, it really spoke to me in a weird kind of way. And so I got good pretty quick. And like in high school, I took all computer classes in high school, but I didn't really care much for the classroom instruction because our teacher wanted us to, you know, um, format tax tables and things like that. And I was really interested I wanted to write a natural language parser, kind of like the ones they used to use. And I don't know if you remember Infocom that used to make the
Oh,
text
yeah.
adventure games,
Zork,
Zork.
all those text adventure games that were written like books, they were wonderful.
Yeah. So, I played those, and I thought I could do this, and I would puzzle out like how to split up a line of text and how to make sense of each of all the different parts. And when I did that, that's like all I did in high school.
Yeah.
Was write one text parser after another, try to make them better and better and better. And so, there is your education. There's what you go to school and study officially, and then there's that 10,000 hours, you know,
Yeah.
that space Malcolm, I can't think of his name, but that he
Malcolm
talks
Gladwell?
about. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I see she's probably within earshot, but I see the same thing with my daughter, um, who she's standing in the kitchen listening to me now. She draws pretty much nonstop, and I've really she doesn't show me everything, but I'll catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, and I can see the improvement like from day to day, week to week, and
Mhm.
that's the unofficial education. But I think just doing a thing, you learn it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to make a long story slightly longer, when I got out of Cincinnati Conservatory, um, I went to work at um, Vanderbilt University in the music library, working for this crazy woman who was like a hoarder. And there's not a lot. I mean, there are jobs for people with music history degrees, which is what I studied at that point. And I went into music history because I didn't feel like I was good enough as a performer. I didn't have the kind of stick to itiveness, and it was really hard for me to work pieces up to a really high quality. Um, and I would see all these people around me who just seemed to do it effortlessly. It's probably because they had put in their 10,000 hours in that instead of programming computers.
And
So
that it really wasn't effortless at all.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But uh, for somebody who studied music history, your options are kind of work in the library or become a professor. And I wasn't really interested in either one of those things. And um, the internet was really, or not the internet, but the World Wide Web was getting started about that time, and it was wide open. Like you didn't need a degree, you didn't need any credentials. You just needed a little bit of swagger, and and I was able to muster that. So, and then it turned into a career somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neat. And
Yeah.
so let's talk about the writing part. When did you start writing?
Uh, oh, probably about the same time, maybe even a little bit younger. I used to write stories involving all my classmates, and I'd write science fiction stories and war stories. Those are the two things I was really interested in,
Uh-huh.
and the fates of the characters were intimately tied to how I felt about that particular kid. I would name them after the kid, and then if it's somebody I didn't like, they'd get blown up, and if it was somebody that I did like, they would be the hero of the story. So yeah, I wrote these things, and I was uh, a very avid reader as well. I kind of lived in books. I mean, my family life was sort of a wreck. My parents got divorced when I was 10, and we didn't have really anything. We had two cars. That was it. And it was two cars is actually kind of it sounds great. Like, hey, you had two cars. You must have been rich. But one of them was just a source of gasoline for the other one. So, like during the gas shocks of the 1980, whatever it was. And um, I remember my mother going out with a rubber tube and trying to siphon gas out of the Dodge to put in the Volkswagen Beetle.
Wow.
And she was rewarded for her efforts with a mouthful of gasoline. So, this is the sort
She
of,
only did this once.
she did it. Yeah, that's right. Once it
Okay.
didn't happen again. I don't know what happened to that
Didn't
Dodge, but
get the hang of the siphoning.
that's right.
Yeah. You got to
No.
do it. You got to do it to get good at it.
Yeah, you gotta suffer a little bit. You gotta spend
Yeah.
10,000 hours at it. But that was our life in 1980, and then we drifted for quite a bit. We moved to Arizona where my aunt lived, and we went up to Michigan where my grandparents lived. My mom went back to school, and we were apart for her for a couple of years. And so it was kind of like uh, I was either was new in town and didn't know anybody, or else ultimately we wound up in Michigan, in rural Michigan, and there was nobody around. So what is there to do? I mean, there's only so long. There's no video games. It's 1980. I mean, we could have had an Atari, but we didn't. And television's got 3 channels, and you're living out in the country, you get bored, and so I read everything I could get my hands on, and I think that was my 10,000 really in a lot of ways as far as writing is concerned. Anyway, I had 2 pairs of 10,000 hours because I had the computers too, but
Yeah, that's allowed. Yeah.
yeah, that's 20,000 hours.
Can you?
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Is there? So, what's the first thing you wrote that you really felt was maybe more than just blowing up people you hated? That you really thought, oh,
yeah.
this is substantial.
Well, I wrote all through high school. I was editor for the literary magazine in my senior year, which is it's kind of absurd when I stop and think about it, because it's not like I really cared that much about the literary magazine. I just loved the fact that I had an office.
Yeah.
And it had a computer in it. It had an Apple II, Apple IIe, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
old school. And I would just sit in there and write these ridiculous stories. And you know, I didn't. I think I was probably in college before I stopped writing about, you know, blowing up my friends or whatever. So, uh,
That
but
wasn't the
I did.
question. Not when you stopped that, but when you started something else. That's what I was asking.
Right, right. But I did. I wrote a lot in high school, and I didn't really think that much of it. But other people were reading it and were like, "Oh, this is really great." And so, you know, that encouraged me to do more. And when I got into college, I wrote for the student paper, and um, kind of on and off. I don't think they, you know, it's ironic. I now that I think about it, I did music criticism. I did a lot of pieces about performances of faculty members in the music school, and I was generally pretty kind to them because, you know, they were in control of my grades.
Yeah.
But I also wrote reviews of local bands, and I was brutal, and I made people mad.
Yeah, a good scathing review is really damaging. Like if you can tell that
Yeah,
the
and
guys,
it's
if they're smart and they're saying not nice things, then
yeah,
uh-oh.
yeah, and you know, people were. I did get some people pretty angry at me, and you know, I thought it was kind of funny because I was at a distance and they couldn't come after me. But you know, but I wrote I published my own little zines in college as well. I had this little thing called Sweat Potato, which was just a collection of little essays and cartoons and things like that. So
Oh.
I got a few friends to write stuff, and I would send them out through Fact Sheet 5. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Mm-mm.
It was a magazine zine, really, published in the 80s and 90s, I guess. I actually, it may still exist today, although it's probably a website now. But it was a giant listing of other zines that other people made. This was a hobby where people would make these little magazines, you know,
Yeah.
and you'd send them to people for a few bucks. I'd sold mine for like $2.50 a piece or something like that. You know, I'd
Mhm.
send out a couple dozen or something, and then I did another one called Bandersnatch Press, which was a little more serious. The essays were a little more, um, they weren't just like jokes. Uh, Jokes are a big part of my life. but but yeah, I got a little more serious about it at that point. And then you know, I had some occasions in when I went to Cincinnati. Um, I think that's where it started to occur to me that I actually had some talent as a writer, because um, the Karen Pendle, who wrote like a really significant book on opera. I took her opera class and didn't do very well,
Yeah, yeah.
but but she liked my writing, and she said to me one time, she said, "You're the best writer that's passed this school in 10 years." And obviously that stuck with me because I'm telling you right now. But you know, I kind of drifted off track though. Once I left there, I tried I tried to get some stuff into the national scene, um, and I didn't get along with the people there all that well, and uh, they gave me a little bit of criticism, and I didn't take it well. And
This is in Boston?
um, no, this was in Nashville. When I left Cincinnati, I moved back to Nashville for a couple of years,
Oh,
and
okay.
then moved to Boston. So uh, so I kind of stopped at that point for a while, and we moved up to Boston, and I lived there for 7 years. And um, I started working around 2001. I started working at a place called Aquent, which is like staffing. It's a creative staffing agency, but they had a magazine called 1099, which was a magazine specifically for freelancers. And there was a guy there who's an editor. His name was Ken Gordon, and he he had you know, I would write like little tiny things. I was the technical director, so I wasn't expected to produce words, but I would occasionally. And he he noticed that I was capable of stringing a few words together, and so he's been in my corner for a long time. Like, he's been a real sort of big booster of my stuff. And it was around the time that my daughter was born, which was 2002. I think about it. 2002. You know, I started thinking about my work and what I was doing and how so much of it was so ephemeral. Like you make websites, they're here today, they're gone in a year or less, and there's very little record of what you've done at all. And so I thought, well, I should produce something a little more substantial. And I had listened to an interview with uh, you're gonna find this surprising, but it was actually William Buckley.
Okay.
Yeah, not the sort
Some
of
folks
person you'd expect me to give advice.
tell people who that is, because there's a lot of folks that forgot.
Yeah,
who
William Buckley was like this. He was sort of the cornerstone of the intellectual part of the Republican Party in the late '60s and '70s, and he was very combative. He was always on Dick Cavett and whatnot, yelling at Gore Vidal.
Right.
And yeah, and he was. I think he was kind of. I mean, like the content of his arguments, I would pick a bone with, but he was a smart guy, and he knew things about being a writer. And I heard an interview with him one time. This is after he died, in which he said that he would go out in the country and he stay in some cottage or wherever people stay in the country in England. He was English, and every summer, and he would write. I think he said 1,500 words a day, which is not a huge amount, especially if that's all you're doing. And he said at the end of the summer, you had a book,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't really thought of that before. I think when I would start, if I would try to tackle a big project, I would just try to do it kind of all at once. Like I would start writing, and I'd write until I was just sick to my stomach, and then I would go to sleep, and then the next day I would forget that I had done anything, and it would collect dust, and that would be the end of it. So this idea of like doing things incrementally, and it takes me a while, by the way. I'm a little late on the draw on everything, so I know this is something that like a lot of people figure out in college, but it took me a lot longer. So what I figured out was that like if I set myself a really just ludicrously low bar of 100 words, like 100 words is nothing. You can write that in a few minutes, but that's the minimum. That's what I got to do every day. 100 words, just 100 words, And so I started doing it. I started writing 100 words. And the funny thing about writing 100 words is when you write once you've written 100, often you'll write 800, maybe 1,000. Once you start, you don't want to stop. But then the next day, if you don't feel like it, well, it's okay. Just write 100. You write 100. Yeah, well, I wrote 600. So I did this every day, and then we moved here, and I continued working on it. And in about 2 years, I had a novel. It's a terrible novel. But it's finished. Actually, hang on just a second. It
We
still
have time.
exists.
Are you going to read it to us? We have time.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay.
Here it is.
Really? Is that really it?
Yes.
Wow.
Caterwall.
Now,
It's about a band.
You say it's terrible. How do you know?
It's bad.
Who's read
That's nobody.
it? Okay. All right. I'm going to call you on that.
A couple people read it. I think my wife might have read it, but I don't think it's very good. But to me, the important thing about it was just making the connection between that daily goal and reaching this stage, this point where I've got, how many pages is this? It's like 200 pages. But
it's part of your 10,000 hours, right? Finishing a novel is finishing a novel, good or bad.
Yeah.
You can always write another one if you've written one.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So
good.
I don't know that.
That's
I can't
interesting.
remember what the original question was, but I think that's probably
the original question was, when did you write something that you felt was of consequence? And you've answered that well. And the novel counts. Even if you don't think it's good, it's of consequence because you finished it. So
yeah, it's a milestone one way or another.
Well,
the truth of the matter is, like I just turned 52, and I haven't won a Pulitzer yet. I'm still working on it, but if I don't,
it's great. Let me tell you, when you get your Pulitzer, you're gonna love it. I love mine.
You get like a free dinner someplace or something like that.
Well, you get to be on Saturday Night Live. It's amazing. So I'm told.
The point I was driving at for a sidetrack
Hi,
by
Doug Blackman.
necessity making jokes is that I think in the end, like you really do have to, you have to draw your own satisfaction from this. You can't do it for somebody else. You can't do it for. I mean, you can do it for a paycheck,
Yeah.
but I do computer programming for a paycheck, and I'm kind of I'll do it, but I'm a little over it. So
Yeah.
the truth of the matter is, at this point, I love writing. I know I can write a novel. I can write. I just got finished writing 26 essays over the past year,
Hmm.
27 actually, because I wrote one additional one that didn't get published. But and uh, and I get great joy out of doing that. Like as my wife will tell you, if you ask her, when I'm writing, I'm laughing, I'm guffawing, like I'm amusing myself, which is a little pathetic, but it's that's great. Like I am my own entertainer.
I don't know if it's pathetic. Why would it be pathetic? I mean, I guess I get it, like you're amusing yourself. Like there's
I'm so damn funny.
right. But it isn't really that. It isn't really that because I think when you write, you surprise yourself. You're laughing because, hey, it's like
Yeah,
another person takes over and you're like, well, I like this
yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, these sentences sometimes they seem to come out of the ether,
Yeah.
fully formed with a million clauses. And my writing is a little on the ornate side, I think you could say. So
Yeah.
it's fun to just to be plugging along in some long convoluted sentence, and just like a whole phrase, a whole clause will just drop in, and it's perfectly formed. It's got all the right words, and it makes me laugh.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Love
you can't tickle yourself because you know when you're going to stop, right? There's
it.
no surprise element there. You're in complete control. But there's something about writing, if
Yeah,
where you can surprise yourself, and
that's
that
true.
tickles, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Yeah.
So let's talk about the first thing you wrote that you really were proud of. The real like you were like, wow, hey, I did something here.
Right. Uh, that's hard to say. I mean, there was I wrote a piece in graduate school about Miles Davis. It was called The Dialectic of Miles Davis. And it's funny because I've been cited
Ah,
by an academic one time.
that's
And
cool.
it was for The Dialectic of Miles Davis. So the paper was about Bitches Brew
Yeah.
and In a Silent Way, which
Okay.
I felt like were kind of almost like two sides of a coin.
Yeah.
They're really different from each other, and I honestly don't. It's been a long time since I've even listened to either of those two albums, so I couldn't say that much about them now.
Well, the
But I
obvious
think we
difference
could,
is that Bitches Brew is a proto electric album.
yeah,
It's very odd and weird and, new
uh,
sounds, and In a Silent Way is a very traditional sounding record.
right, right, and they came back to back, I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah, so they're it's yeah, it's the dialectic of Miles Davis. It's the two sides of Miles Davis, right there in those two albums, and there was more to it than that. It was like 15 pages long.
Is that
But
all?
yeah, actually, I guess I don't know, it might have been longer than that.
Yeah.
But that was for I wrote that for a class, but then I wound up submitting it to they published a research journal at CCM, and I submitted it, and it was accepted and published, and yeah, it was a big deal. I felt that's probably the first big hit I ever
Mhm.
had. But you know, it's been on and off. Like writing has been very much on and off for a very long time for me. I'll do it, and things seem to going well, and then I would either get discouraged or I get sidetracked and forget about it for a long time, and then something else happens that makes me remember that I can do this. And so the thing that really kind of happened that has sent me on my current trajectory, which I mean, really since that piece that I published in the Bitter Southerner about the Battle of Atlanta, which was in not I'm not trying to remember the year of the Battle of Atlanta. I'm trying to remember when it was published. It was like it might have been 2008 or 2009 or something like that. I think it was an anniversary of the battle itself. Anyway, uh, I had written it. I actually let me back up and just say that this was sort of a project beyond just simply writing. Like I had lived here for a few years, and I became interested in the Battle of Atlanta because it's right here in our backyard. I mean, it's like right here, you know. And one of the big features of that battle was a night march. The night before it happened, the Confederates decided that they would take a division, I think it was a couple divisions, and they would march south, and then I wish I had a map. They marched south of the city and then east, like over toward in the direction of Decatur. And the idea was that they were going to come up behind the Federal line. The Federals were on the east side of the city, and they were going to come up behind them and catch them off guard and destroy them. You know, so they marched 15 miles at night in the wilderness south of Atlanta, and I thought, you know, I mean, there are maps and you can see where exactly where they walked. And I thought, I'll do the same thing. So I went out. I didn't do it at night, but I went out and hiked this route. I was not terribly well prepared for it, and kind of developed heat exhaustion before it was all over. But I did do the whole thing, and I sat down and wrote a fairly lengthy piece about it. One thing that's about my writing is that when I start, it's a little hard for me to stop, and so I tend to write very, very long things, which is a sort of mixed blessing. But so I wrote this piece and then threw it in a desk drawer for a couple of years, and I guess it was the 150th anniversary of the battle was coming up. No, I'm not going to try to do math, but there was something happening, and I figured I should try to do something with this. And I showed it to a friend of mine, and he was like, "Oh, why don't you send it to the Bitter Southerner?" And I had a vague notion of what the Bitter Southerner was, but I hadn't read any of their stuff, and I didn't really know that much about them. And so I just sent it off, and expecting absolutely nothing. And their editor, Chuck Reese, contacted me, and he said, "Oh, we love this. This is absolutely fantastic." And that buoyed my spirits quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, they published it, and it went over with a bang. I think a lot of people really liked it. And I still, every now and then, will get messages from people who run across it and read it and enjoy it. And then that led to Chuck Reese became very much a champion of mine as well. And I got to a point where, I would come up with some crazy idea and call him, and he'd be like, "Yeah, let's do this." And so I told him I wanted to get on the train and ride down from DC to New Orleans. The Crescent, which used to be called the Southern Crescent, and was part of the longer line, which is now mostly gone. And he said, "Yeah, let's do that." And he paired me up with Artem Nazaroff, who's this amazing, just amazing photographer. He's just like pretty naturally talented. He just points a camera at something, and a work of art comes out,
Yeah.
And plus he's a crazy travel companion. Like, he's an insane person to be with for several days, there were times on that trip where I thought I might die.
Did you want to tell one of those stories?
Oh my God. I think the craziest one, like, we went to three places. We went to Danville, Virginia. And there's some crazy stuff happened there. We went to Meridian, Mississippi, and then of course we went to New Orleans. And New Orleans is a little. I've always been told that New Orleans is a dangerous city, and if you walk out with your wallet not properly secured, it will be stolen from you, and you'll be murdered to boot. So it's not really that dangerous, but there are parts of New Orleans that you probably shouldn't be wandering around in at night. And of course, we were both of the same mind as far as like where we were going to stay. We weren't going to stay in a Holiday Inn and that kind of thing. We were going to stay in cheap, if possible, extremely dumpy motels. And the cheap, dumpy motels in New Orleans are in those places you're not supposed to go, right? So we had this cheap motel, and we arrived, we dumped our stuff off there, and we went down to the French Quarter and did the thing you do when you're in New Orleans. And then we were walking back to the hotel that night. I'm not sure I wrote about this in the piece. I wrote a little bit about it. There's a ton of photographs of these people that we met. We're walking back, and there's a guy walking in front of us, and he's just He looks like he was chiseled out of stone. He's just all muscle and like this thin little mohawk, and he's covered with tattoos, and he's got like scars just everywhere. He looks like a dangerous character, and he's walking with this woman who just didn't. She didn't really look like she belonged with him at all. She was a little frumpy and kind of uh, if you caught her driving a suburban around um, you know to the Home Depot or something like that, she wouldn't have looked out of place at all. They were walking side by side, and Artem said, are they together or are they together for the night? And I looked at him, and they weren't close together. They weren't holding hands or anything like that. I was like, they're together. Just, and he yells out to him. He says, "Hey, you!" and the guy turned around, and I mean, he looked dangerous. He looked scary, And he looked daggers at us, and he was like, "What?" And Artem turned on his crazy charm. He's got this, he's from Russia, and a fairly thick Russian accent. It's not super thick. You can understand what he's saying, but he can crank it up or turn it down depending on what you need. And he charmed them into eventually, after 20 minutes of talking to them, they invited us to a party at their house the next night, and we wound up going. And this place was like a flop house. It was just like I think they were squatting, actually. Like a bunch of people who were there were definitely squatters in other houses in the area. And they gave us a tour of the house. Oh yeah. They when they invited us in, they said the party's in back, and they said, but you have to come through the front door. And we were like, okay, fine. So we went through the front door, we went through the house, and the house was just like totally devoid of any furniture whatsoever. There's like pallets laid down on the floor, and it was filthy. Yeah. So we went through the house, we went out to the back, and there's this like dusty, dirty backyard. There's a bunch of people back there, and they all look like those people you see that like hop freight trains, and they're all kind of filthy, and they have a dog with them or something like that. There's a bunch of those people out back, and it turned out later, we were told later that they had asked us specifically to come through the house because they had spells cast on the house. This is a weird combination of like trained kids with like New Orleans voodoo kind of stuff. Like there was a guy there who claimed that he was a wizard. And, so he said they had spells cast on the house, and if we had said that we wanted to go, we were just going to go around instead of going through the house, then they would have told us that we had to leave, because that would be an indication to them that there was something wrong with us. But so they had built a grill out of concrete blocks, like Brico blocks, mm-hmm. and they had $1,500 worth of meat that they were barbecuing on this makeshift grill, and they had bought it with food stamps. They had pooled all their food stamps and bought all this meat, and it was just meat. That's all it was. There were no vegetables, there was no bread, there were no plates, there was no silverware. It was just like you just grab a sausage and just eat it. They did have a thing of a bag of Wonder Bread that you could use as like a utensil.
Just pick it up.
Yes, and that's what we did. Mm-hmm. But at some point, I was invited into the house and told to bring my writing implements. And I sat down at the kitchen table with the guy that we had met the previous night. Sean was his name. And he started telling us a story. And he started the story with, "We're not gangsters." And then he proceeded to describe a gang, as they provided protection to like fortune tellers and people like that in the French Quarter. And they reported to a higher gang organization. And they were armed, and like the house was full of weapons and so forth, and they were all scary, Yeah. And that's we spent the night with them basically up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning, and then we went back to our hotel and got up 5 hours later and got back on the train.
That's a really great story.
Yeah, it was insane. I'm glad to have survived it, but that's the kind of trouble you get into when you're with Artem. He makes friends with everybody. He's better at that than I am. That's why he's a good person to travel with, because I really have to push myself to kind of break out of my shell. It's very easy for me to just sort of like go and see a statue someplace and write about that. Here's what happened, and I went and saw the statue. But it makes for a more interesting story if your life is in danger at least one or two times.
I'll put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.